operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
And that little piece of history is what made Mario Savio so famous and lit up an entire generation, really. I'm Bird, your host. It's Shedding Light, here with Paul George of Peninsula Peace and Justice. What's it all mean to you?
Basically, what the situation was, it was very related to the civil rights movement. The summer of '64, Mario Savio, who became one of the leaders of the free speech movement and recognized for his rhetorical skills. The guy was a fabulous speaker. He had spent the summer, I believe it was in Mississippi, helping to register black voters, and he was really deeply into the civil rights movement. And came back to campus, and there were a number of groups tabling, just simply tabling for different civil rights groups, CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And at the time, UC Berkeley had some pretty strict regulations. You could only raise money for either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. You could only advocate for politicians from those two parties and no other party. So the civil rights organizing that the students were trying to do was essentially against university regulations. Mm-hmm. And they told people to, shut down these tables. And the administration kept making announcements that they were going to strictly enforce the regulations. And it finally led to escalating protests by the students that they wanted their rights to speak out, claiming First Amendment rights. They saying we don't give this up just because we're students at a state university. The First Amendment always applies. What we're talking about today is the events of December 2nd and December 3rd, 1964, when the students decided to go on a strike, start a sit-in of the administration building, Sproul Hall. And the famous Mario Savio speech comes from December 2nd as they were gathering outside Sproul Hall and getting ready to go in and take over the administration building and do a sit-in. Because of this speech that so electrified everyone and really summed things up so concisely. And, he hadn't planned to give this speech. It was almost spontaneous. Hadn't worked it out or anything, written it down or anything. He was just moved from his heart to get up there and talk about how he felt about having his freedom of speech suppressed, being, the raw material for the corporate world was how, the students were seeing themselves. And he was just moved to get up and speak and came out with these fabulous words. And, you have to keep it in context how important this was at the time. It's 1964. Most of the students, as I mentioned, were doing civil rights organizing. But freeing up the campuses to do political activity led directly into the massive opposition to the Vietnam War that started on college campuses. Without the free speech movement and its success at Berkeley, and ultimately it was successful, they changed all the regulations and allowed political organizing, political advocacy outside of the electoral system. Finally became permitted. The free speech movement, the protest movement was an absolute success. And it opened the door for campus activism around this country, which became the center, really, of the anti-Vietnam War efforts. So it was a really interesting time. And extremely important. It's, I think it's important. I'm glad you wanted to do this today because I think part of it as activists, especially young activists, study your history, learn where the movements have been, because there have been some incredible movements in this country. And when you study the history of social activism in this country, you realize that all the significant social changes that we've had, all the progressive achievements that we've had, have always and only come from the bottom up. We've never had an enlightened leader who says, hey, you know, I'm going to give you the 40-hour work week. Hey, I'm going to give you health care. You know, hey, I'm going to give you freedom of speech. No, it's always been demanded from the bottom and wrested away from those in power. And that's the history of our country, and it's a hidden history. It's not taught in schools. It's not taught in schools the way it should be.
Paul George, Peninsula Peace and Justice, speaking here on Shedding Light. We're going to go out with Edwin Starr on war. And Paul, you take care, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Thanks, Bird.
Thank you.
Yeah. What? Absolutely nothing.
I'm Paul George, here to tell you I still have the freedom of speech to say Orwell was an optimist.